Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 14th of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. According to the information I have, Zelensky these days made a meeting with his general, especially with Valery Zaluzhny and Syrsky, the head of Ukrainian infantry army, and they were discussing the situation with the counteroffensive operation in the south, and Zelensky insists to continue the battle for Azov. But the general, the head of Ukrainian army, Zaluzhny, reported that he is against this operation because of heavy losses. And Zelensky, according to the sources we have, reported that the Western countries gave the Ukraine the time until November. And if the Ukrainians are not able to show any results until November of 2023, then the Western countries will reduce the finance of this war in the next year, and the Ukrainians will be forced to start negotiation process with Russia. So that's why the Ukrainians don't have any other option, but they will continue, because this is not just a question of Ukraine. Of course, the main thing for these people currently, this is the question of their own lives, like Zelensky, Zaluzhny, and many other people of Ukrainian authorities. From the other side, we got a lot of interesting updates from the Black Sea. The commander of Black Sea Fleet issues a warning to mariners about presence of mine hazard on the shipping route in the northwest part of Black Sea. So this is the first warning from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, from Russia, that they're not going to prolong the grain deal. For example, today some sources from Turkey, like very close to Erdogan himself, reported that Erdogan and Vladimir Putin has their own understanding of the situation, and that some Western sources and Russian sources translated that message that the Russians were going to continue to prolong the grain deal, but later the press secretary of Vladimir Putin reported and told us that Vladimir Putin didn't say anything about the prolonging of the deal. So anyway, as we know, by the 17th of July is the last day of the grain deal. I expect that on the 15th, 16th and 17th of July we're going to see a lot of very interesting events in the Black Sea and in the vicinity of this area. I believe Zelensky wants to control this territory and this sector, and probably he will try to show the Western countries that he can control the situation. And probably the next days we are going to see some attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack Russian fleet in the vicinity of Crimea. And now let's continue with the situation on the ground, and let's talk about Kherson area. These days the Ukrainians published very interesting video of their special operation in between the islands of the Dnieper river, and they're showing that on the video they provided. They shown a few fast boats running across the Dnieper river with machine gunner, and the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions. And there was a very interesting video. The Ukrainians haven't provided us any information about the results of that operation, just they were talking about the operation itself and so on. But the most important piece of information that we can take from this video is that the main islands of in the entrance from the Black Sea to the Dnieper are under Russian control. So as you can see on this video, this on the right corner of this video, you see two boats that were heading in direction of this island, of this land, and basically this video is geolocated, and that operation took place exactly in this area. So the Ukrainians on the boat were trying to attack the Russians in this area, and basically this video confirms that the Russians have established control, or at least by the moment when that video was created, the Russians controlled this territory. So basically, according to this video, there was a lot of episodes of clashes. On this picture you see the areas where the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russians and bomb them. Some of the boats were destroyed during that operation, some of the Russian soldiers were destroyed during that operation, but anyway, as we can see, according to that geolocated video, the Russians at least have control over this part of islands, maybe even more. Maybe the Ukrainians controls just the northern part of these islands along the bank of Kizomys, this small settlement. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in Kherson area, and as I understand mainly along the Kherson and Dnieper islands, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. There are no updates from Antonov Bridge. As we discussed, the Russians stepped back to the south and they left just a small rearguard forces on the north, that the main purpose of them is to repel Ukrainian commandos and reconnaissance teams attacks and so on. Now we are moving to Orechov bridgehead, to the Bradley Square, to Petykhatki. There were no updates from Petykhatki itself. The Ukrainians, after a few days of fierce fightings, after they were defeated during the last attempts to attack Russian positions in Zhiribyanki, currently the Ukrainians doing some kind of regrouping, trying to get more weapon, more fresh soldiers and so on. The only video we have from the Russian side is that during the previous night the Russians made missile attack in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Malokaterinivka. As you can see, the explosion was very heavy. The Russians managed to deal a lot of damage. They destroyed some warehouse, probably with Western weapon and Western munition. Now we are moving to the Bradley Square. Today we also had some updates from this territory. The Russians brought their TOS flamethrower systems as close as possible to the combat line, and as soon as the Ukrainians managed to establish their positions along these forest lines on the north of Robotyne, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to improve their positions by sending more and more reserves, more and more reinforcement to this line, and they're trying to accumulate their forces before the next attack on the north of Robotyne. The Russians, from their side, brought their flamethrower systems and they're bombing these lines almost every single day. It's very difficult to survive after another such strike, but the Ukrainians don't have any other option, and they're sending more and more forces to this valley of death or forest lines of death. On this video we see the usage of flamethrower systems by the Russians. You see the explosions are very heavy, and I am not sure that anything could survive after such a heavy explosions. From the other side, while the Ukrainians are trying to accumulate their forces on this forest line, it's very difficult to understand how many Ukrainians can survive after another day, another 24 hours on this line. From the other side, we see that Ukrainians are trying to develop their bridgehead to the east, and they're trying, but for these purposes, first they need to demine the fields and to prepare the bridgehead before another wave of attack in direction of Verbova. For example, the Russians published very interesting video how the Ukrainian tank was moving along the fields. First I thought that this tank got on minefields and was destroyed, but later the Ukrainians published the same video but from another angle, and on this video we see that that wasn't a tank, that was a tank with demining equipment, and basically that tank was trying to demine the fields before the next wave of Ukrainian attack. And basically, as you can see, nothing have happened with this tank. He continued movements to the south, trying to complete the demining in this area and to prepare the bridgehead for another Ukrainian offensive attack. For now, there were no updates from any attempt from the Ukrainian side to attack the Russian positions. Very interesting updates are coming from Guliaipole bridgehead from this territory. We can't say that this is Guliaipole. We can say that very interesting updates are coming from the border between Orechov bridgehead and Guliaipole bridgehead. The Ukrainians continue accumulation of their forces in the vicinity of Mala Takhmachka. According to updates we received in the past, the Ukrainians tried to accumulate a lot of foreign volunteers on this bridgehead. Also, the Ukrainians continue their accumulation of the forces in the vicinity of Guliaipolska, and let's say the third group of Ukrainians currently, the Ukrainians are trying to accumulate the third group in the vicinity on the north of Mirne and between Guliaipole and Dorozhnyanka. And as I understand, according to updates from the Russian side, the Ukrainians have already accumulated a significant number of forces, and the main purpose of those accumulations is to attack the Russian positions in this salient, at least from 3 sides: along the road in direction of Bogate, through the settlements like Lugavskoye. The second direction from Guliaipolska to Mirne Zagorne, and the third direction is from Guliaipole Dorozhnyanka in direction of Pologi. The Russians allowed the Ukrainians to accumulate their forces along the combat line, and they also started bombing their positions using the TOS flamethrower systems and different kind of weapon. For example, in this video we see how the Russians destroy another ammo depot. Also, they try to attack the Ukrainian light vehicles, their transport, their trucks in this vicinity of Lugovskoye and Belogoria. From the northern flank of the same area, the Russians discovered and tracked the Ukrainian positions in the forest lines along the railroad ways, and after that they also bombed the Ukrainians using the TOS flamethrower systems. As I understand, they managed to deal significant damage to the any Ukrainian forces that were trying to hide among these forest lines. For now, the Ukrainians still haven't launched any attack, but as I understand, according to updates we got, that they have already completed the regrouping, and maybe the next few days we're going to see the beginning of Ukraine offensive operation in this area as well. Now we're moving to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Today we got a lot of very interesting updates from this sector. The Ukrainians during the day took at least made 2 attempts to attack the Russian positions along the river. The Ukrainians first update we got that the Ukrainians launched offensive operation in direction of Urozhaine in this area, and this update we got somewhere at 1 p.m. of the local time. After a massive artillery preparation, the Ukrainians launched offensive operation trying to penetrate the Russians' defense orders in the vicinity of that settlement Urozhaine. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian forces, and they started bombing and shelling the Ukrainians' offensive road with all types of weapons they had. And by the 2 p.m. of the local time, the Russians, according to the Russians, managed to calculate around 85 wounded and killed Ukrainian soldiers just on these roads of attack. The somewhere at 7 p.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians made another attack, but not from the, let's say, the eastern part of this river of Urozhaine, but the Russians were trying to attack from Vremivka, from this bridgehead to the south in direction of Staromayorskaya. And the first confirmation of that attack took somewhere at 7 p.m. of the local time. The Ukrainians were using few groups for that attack, and each group had around 60 soldiers. By 7 p.m., according to the Russians managed to repel at least 5 waves of attacks, and also the Russians reported that during the day, during those 5 waves of attack, the Ukrainians lost around 160 soldiers. So basically, during the previous 12 hours, just on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, according to the Russian piece of information, the Ukrainians lost around 240 soldiers while attacking in direction of Staromayorsk and Urozhaine. Of course, before that attack, the Ukrainians were trying to repel and to suppress Russian artillery, and they published another video how during that suppression process they destroyed another Russian grad on the south of Staromayorsk. The grad that the Russians, the grad systems, artillery systems that the Russians were trying to use to support the Russians' defense forces on the north. Now we're moving to the South Donetsk area. We haven't received a lot of updates, just a few videos, like the Russians discovered and tracked the Ukrainian armored vehicle inside the Vuhledar, and using few drones they were trying to attack, and they managed to destroy one. And artillery and bombings of Novomikhailivka, the Russians, by those attacks, the Russians were trying to support their forces during the defense operation in the vicinity of on the south of Marinka, on the east of Pobeda. As we discussed in the previous videos, the Ukrainians somehow managed to accumulate their forces, somehow they managed to regroup and to launch their counter-offensive operation from Novomikhailivka. And as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians managed to return control over these trenches, over these fortifications, over this stronghold, and the Russians were forced to step back to the north. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings from Petykhatki to Novomikhailivka, the Ukrainians lost 210 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 4 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of losses is very high, and the level of losses is higher in comparison even with the previous days. And the previous day also. Now we are moving to the Donetsk front line. There were a lot of updates as well. The level of losses is very heavy as usually. The Ukrainians published very interesting video for one episode of Clashes in Marinka. You know that Ukrainians do have possibilities to use drones. As you can see, they can't deep very get very deep inside of Russian territory with drones. But when talking about the combat line, you see that almost every single day the Ukrainians publish more and more videos, fresh videos of attacks against the Russian positions. From the Russian side, they also have possibility to attack the Ukrainians, but when talking about the Russians, mainly we got videos not just about drones, but also about artillery strikes against the Ukrainian positions in the back, their reserves, and so on. When talking about Avdiivka, we haven't received any updates from this stronghold, from this settlement. As I understand, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians made any attempt to attack or to counterattack on this bridgehead. And now we're moving to Klishchiivka. We got today a lot of updates from this bridgehead. The Ukrainians launched this morning, probably this night of the local time, the Ukrainians launched significant offensive operation in this area after very heavy artillery preparation, and also some Ukrainian sources published the video of bombing and shelling the forest on the west of Klishchiivka. As you can see, this is completely under fire. The forest was set on fire by the Ukrainian artillery systems. So as you can see, the situation and the entire situation of the Russian forces inside of this forest is very difficult because it's a smoke. It's very difficult to breathe. I believe that some Russian forces were forced to step back towards Klishchiivka or something like this. And after that, the Ukrainians launched a series of offensive operations, and the Russians reported, we got reports also somewhere at 7 p.m. that there was a very fierce tank battle in this area between the western edge of Klishchiivka and the forest lines along the channel. So basically the most fierce fightings today took place, and it was like combat fight, like face-to-face fighting from Klishchiivka to the forest line of the Russian forces. They were attacking in this direction, and the Ukrainians were counter-attacking or attacking from their side, and they were also using their tank forces. So there was a very fierce battles among these fields. As you saw according to this video, there was a very heavy support from the Ukrainian side with artillery. They were trying to suppress Russian forces, and mainly that attack was just one purpose, not even to suppress Russian forces, but the main goal was, of course, to suppress is like the secondary goal. The first goal was to suppress Russian anti-tank troopers, so with a weapon that can use to destroy tanks. So that was the main purpose, to force the infantry to step back and just to force the Russians to keep armored vehicles on this bridgehead. There was a very fierce fightings. The Russians were using the tanks, light vehicles, and the Russians managed to, during the day, brought some reinforcements to these positions, and the Russians managed to counterattack. And for now, there are still clashes. For Klishchiivka and Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye, Zaryanovka, for this entire area. And this battle is going to determine a lot, and I don't think that this battle is going to be finished today, but this battle is going to determine a lot. Now before we're moving to the Siversk and further northern front lines, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings from Marinka, let's say, to the Siversk bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 280 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of losses is lower in comparison with the previous days. With the previous day, for example, yesterday, according to the Ministry of Defense, the Ukrainians lost 480 soldiers. But anyway, there are still fierce fightings, and tomorrow I believe the numbers will be even high in comparison with these days. Now let's move to Torskoye salient. The Russians published the video how they were storming the Ukrainian trenches along this forest line, along this forest. This video is geolocated, and after very heavy artillery preparation, the Russians started storming the, let's say, edge positions, and the Russians managed to capture them, managed to move deeper inside the forest. We will not see this full video, because there are a lot of casualties, a lot of dead bodies, a lot of killed people, and so on. A lot of Ukrainians, based on that video, took a decision to surrender, and there was one Ukrainian, very interesting episode of that battle, when the Russians were storming the trenches. Like, most of the Ukrainians took a decision to surrender. Let's say that 20 Ukrainian soldiers took a decision to surrender, and there was one Ukrainian soldier who took a decision to continue fighting. Of course, we understand what destiny expected him, but this is a very interesting fact that even the Russians mentioned in the video. The Ukrainians launched a counter-offensive operation in Torskoye as well. They were trying to attack mainly the Ukrainians currently, and mainly the Ukrainians are able to accumulate accumulate and collect their forces just on the line between Yampolovka and Terny. This is the only, let's say, safe area, if we can talk about any safety of Ukrainian forces on this bridgehead, because from the northern area we see that the Russians are too close to Zheribyanka River, so basically this is the only area where the Ukrainians can accumulate forces. There is a supply roads with the western bank of Zheribets River, and from this sector the Ukrainians was trying during the day to attack the Russians in their flanks, trying to cut the salient and to force the Russians to step back to Dibrova. But according to the Russians, they managed to repel all their attacks. There was in those operations, the Ukrainian forces of 42nd Mechanized Brigade, of 15th Regiment, of 67th Mechanized Brigade, of 21st Mechanized Brigade, of 63rd Mechanized Brigade were involved. They were attacking the Russians from in the vicinity of Terny and Nevska, but one more time, all those attacks were repelled. The Russians continue regrouping, and as soon as they understand that the Ukrainians are no longer able to support this level of attack, this level of pressure, the Russians will launched another wave of counteroffensive, and basically they will complete the clearing of Tarskoye, and they will start spreading and stretching this bridgehead to the north, of course, in direction of Terny, and to the south, of course, in direction of Seversky Donetsk River. Now the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Liman front line, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers and 7 artillery systems, including 1 tank. And basically, all those losses among tanks, armored vehicles, took place because of Ukrainian attempts to counterattack the Russians through the fields and in direction upon the Russian flanks. Now we're moving to the Kupyansk front line. We also got interesting updates from this sector. As we discussed, the Russians managed to capture Novoselovska. The Ukrainians managed to bring some reserves, and currently the Ukrainians try to counterattack the Russians. But Novoselovska is not the main goal and not the main settlement that the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to fight for. Everybody understands that Novoselovska is just the key to the next region. For example, for the Ukrainians, if they can control Novoselovska, this is the key for them to attack the direction of Kuzyomovka. But when talking about the Russians, Novoselovka is the key region to start and launch offensive operation in direction of Stelmakhovka. The Russians, of course, want to capture Stelmakhovka. This is a very important settlement, and this settlement is located on the beginning of Zheribets River. So Zheribets River ends on this settlement. So basically, this is a very important part. And who controls Stelmakhovka? This side if the Russians can control Stelmakhovka, they will achieve and they will get operational square. And from this settlement, they will be able to develop their offensive operation at many sites, in every single direction, because there are just fields, settlements, and the distance between settlements is very big. And the Ukrainians from their side also try to support their counter-offensive forces by destroying Russian ammo depots along the road. This video is geolocated, and the Ukrainians claims that as a result of artillery attack, they destroyed the ammo depot that the Russians were using during their offensive operation and their clashes, offensive operation in direction of Novoselovska. And the Russians published also the video, and this very interesting video, and the Russian claims that in Stelmakhovka, in the settlement, the Russians were using TOS flamethrower systems, as you can see, 4th time during this video, and they managed to deal significant damage. And this is a very important thing, because as you know, flamethrower systems, TOS, is very powerful, and the Ukrainians are saying that this is the most dangerous type of weapon that the Russians have. But the thing is that they're very short distance. They have a very short distance or range of missiles. And let's say the old models can attack just on 3.5 kilometers. So imagine yourself. And basically, Stelmakhovka is a very important Ukrainian settlement. It's a stronghold, and this is a very important settlement. And the Russians were attacking this area using the TOS flamethrower system. This video was geolocated. So if we calculate the distance to the closest Russian positions, that means that the Russians, it's like 3.3 kilometers. So basically, according to the specification of that system, the Russians were attacking the Stelmakhovka and Ukrainian positions in that settlement using the, let's say, the maximum distance of attack. But this is the flamethrower systems. You can't move these systems on the edge. You can't use these systems right on the edge of on the combat line, because it's a perfect target for drones to attack them and so on. And we saw the video how the Ukrainians destroyed the Russian ammo depot somewhere in the vicinity of that flamethrower system. So basically there are two options. The first one is that the Russians were using the most upgraded and the most powerful TOS flamethrower systems, and they can attack with and the distance of attack is around 15 kilometers, but they're very expensive and it's a very rare model. And the second option is that during the previous offensive operation in the vicinity of Novosilovska, the Russians managed to capture and to take control over these territories as well, and they managed to get as close as possible to Stelmakhovka as well. And this is the only, if the Russians were using, let's say, the old models of that flamethrower systems. For these purposes, they need to have a barrier that is under control of Russian forces with, like, let's say, a lot of equipment that can suppress Ukrainian drones and so on. Very interesting information, two different options with two different stories, upcoming stories after them. But we will follow this situation because we see that the Russians intensifying their actions in this territory. And the final updates are coming from Kupyansk. The Ukrainian authorities, local authorities, announced evacuation of this settlement. And the governor officers and governor office is about to evacuate these days from this bridgehead. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the Kupyansk front line, the Ukrainians lost 20 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems D-20. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.